7. RS-25 engines lit. 4, 3, 2, 1. Booster ignition. And liftoff. Artemis II now bound for the moon.
Good roll pitch.
Roger, roll pitch. The integrity, AMT high.
AMT high.
December 14th, 1972. A man named Gene Cernan is kneeling in the dust of the moon. He has been here 3 days. He has driven across this valley, collected rocks older than anything on Earth, watched the blue planet hang in a black sky, and thought about his daughter. Before he stands for the last time, he carves her initials into the lunar soil. TDC. Tracy Dawn Cernan. There is no wind on the moon. Those letters are still there. He grips the ladder, and he speaks his last words from the surface.
And God willing, as we shall return.
He believed it. He was wrong. After Apollo 17, the moon became a memory. Not because we lost the ability to go, because we lost the will. The budgets were cut, the rockets were retired, the programs were canceled. Apollo 19, Apollo 20, each one erased before it flew. For 54 years, the furthest any human traveled from Earth was 250 miles. The International Space Station, just above the atmosphere, close enough to still read the shapes of continents out of the window. The moon is 239,000 miles away. We stopped going. Gene Cernan waited 45 years for someone to follow his footsteps. He gave speeches. He testified before Congress. He died in January 2017. He never saw it. In November 2022, before any crew ever flew, NASA launched Artemis I, an uncrewed test. The Orion capsule flew around the moon alone and came home. When engineers inspected the heat shield after splashdown, they found something that should not have been there. Cracks, over 100 of them. Chunks of the protective material, missing. Not burned away cleanly, the way it was designed. Broken, blown off, gone. The heat shield exists for one reason. When a spacecraft returning from the moon hits Earth's atmosphere, it is traveling at nearly 25,000 miles per hour. The air cannot get out of the way fast enough. It compresses. It heats. The temperature outside the capsule reaches 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hotter than the surface of the sun. The heat shield is the only thing between the crew and that fire, and it had failed. Engineers spent 2 years trying to understand what had gone wrong. They discovered the material, a substance called avcoat, could not breathe during a specific phase of re-entry. Gas built up inside it. Pressure cracked the outer layer. Chunks broke away. Their solution was to change the angle of re-entry, apply more heat more consistently to keep the material from trapping gas. A counterintuitive fix. More fire to prevent the fire from breaking the shield. But a former NASA astronaut and heat shield engineer named Charles Camarda was not convinced. He wrote to NASA leadership. He published warnings. He estimated, publicly, a 1 in 20 chance of catastrophic failure. They knew about the heat shield. Every one of them had read the engineering reports. Every one of them had sat in the meetings. And every one of them chose to board. Reed Wiseman, commander, Navy pilot, father of 2 daughters, Katie and Ellie. In 2020, he lost his wife Carol to cancer. On launch day, He took a photograph with his daughters in front of the rocket. His caption, "I love these two ladies, and I'm boarding that rocket, a very proud father." Victor Glover, pilot, the first person of color to fly beyond low Earth orbit in history. When asked about the heat shield risk, he said, "I don't want to discount the things they've said. Anytime you talk about fire, anytime you talk about heat shields, these are high-risk things." He boarded anyway. Christina Cook, mission specialist, the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Jeremy Hansen, mission specialist, Canadian Space Agency, the first non-American to fly to the moon. They named their spacecraft Integrity. Inside the cabin before launch, a small plush toy named Rise was waiting to float, designed by an 8-year-old boy. April 1st, 2026. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. 6:35 in the evening. 8.5 million pounds of thrust. The most powerful rocket to carry human beings since the Saturn V that took Apollo to the moon. The hold-down arms released, the engines lit, and slowly, impossibly slowly for something so massive, the Space Launch System began to rise. Inside the cabin, Rise began to float, and the crew was weightless. 2 minutes after launch, the solid rocket boosters burned out and separated, tumbling away like burning columns, falling back toward the ocean. The core stage engines carrying Orion higher. Then those too fell away, and for the first time in 54 years, human beings were leaving Earth orbit, heading for the moon. On April 6th, 6 days into the mission, the Orion spacecraft passed a record. 252,756 miles from Earth, farther than any human being had ever been from home, in the entire history of our species. The crew fell silent. Then, Jeremy Hansen radioed mission control.
We just realized that we have Earth out window 1 and Moon out window 2. And Earth out window 4 and Moon out window 3. And it gives you the best idea of scale we have had yet. The Moon is about 3 to 4 times the size of the Earth, and it is almost full, and the Earth is just a small crescent out there. It's magnificent. I got a picture of it with the wide lens. Such a majestic view out here.
They came within 4,000 miles of the lunar surface, 7 hours over the far side, terrain that no human eyes had ever seen. They saw 2 unnamed craters, and they asked Mission Control for permission to name them. The first, Integrity, after their spacecraft. The second, Carol. Jeremy Hansen spoke for the crew. A number of years ago, we lost a loved one. Her name was Carol, the spouse of Reed, the mother of Katie and Ellie. It is a bright spot on the moon, and we would like to call it Carol. 2 drogue parachutes deployed at 23,000 feet, then 3 main chutes at 6,000, slowing the capsule from 300 miles per hour to 17. At 8:07 p.m. Eastern Time, the Orion spacecraft, named Integrity, splashed down in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. Just 2.9 miles from the targeted landing site, within 1 mile per hour of predicted entry velocity. The heat shield, later inspected by Navy divers underwater, showed significantly less damage than Artemis I. The fix had worked. Wiseman's first words to Mission Control: "For crew green." Artemis II was a test, a proof that humans could survive the journey, that the heat shield could hold, that after 54 years, we still knew how to do this. Artemis III launches in 2027. Artemis IV, the first crewed lunar landing since 1972, in 2028. The first woman will walk on the moon. The first person of color will walk on the moon. They flew on a spacecraft with a broken heat shield. They named it Integrity. They named a crater after a woman they lost. And they came home. Gene Cernan said we would return. He waited 45 years. He died waiting. But we went back.